The terrible toll of deaths on the front line in Ukraine continues to rise, but now something's changed. More than 4 grim years after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin's mighty war machine has been fought to something close to a standstill. Russia is losing over 1,000 troops a day, approaching the point where they're being killed and wounded faster than Moscow can replace them. Ukraine is making the pace in a new era of warfare, leading the development of war drones in the air and robots on the battlefield, changing the balance of the war and the nature of modern warfare. Donald Trump, Ukraine's most powerful and often grudging backer, told reporters in Washington that he thinks Ukraine is doing well, that he's impressed, which from Trump counts as high praise. The Kremlin's reported to no longer see President Trump as interested in brokering peace on terms acceptable to Russia. In a moment, I will get the view of a Ukrainian political insider, a former advisor to President Zelensky, on whether Ukraine believes the war is at a turning point, whether Donald Trump might place serious pressure on the Russian president to come to the negotiating table with terms that Ukraine might accept. I'll also look at one of the subplots in the story, the sudden falling out between Ukraine and its closest neighbour and formerly closest friend, Poland. And later on, behind the scenes at Westminster in the transition of power between Keir Starmer's premiership and his successor, the premier presumptive in all but name Andy Burnham. MPs, commentators, everyone is trying to work out what kind of leader Burnham will turn out to be. And the science policy editor, Oliver Wright, will be studying the clues. What are you thinking? Send me a text, 87222. Start with the word Times or a tweet to @TimesRadio. First thing, President Trump has been asked if he thinks President Zelensky is winning the war with Russia. This is what he said.
Well, he's doing pretty well. Look, no matter how you look at it, he's doing pretty well. He's holding his own, at least. A lot of people dying on both sides, but I think he's doing pretty well.
And meanwhile, the Polish leader, Donald Tusk, has been speaking at the opening of the Ukraine Reconstruction Conference in Gdansk. He said Ukraine and Poland are friends in Europe who can shape the region's future together. We can now welcome to the programme Igor Novikov, who's a former advisor to President Zelensky. Hi to you, Igor.
Good afternoon, John.
Thank you for joining me. Now, we can't say, I guess, Ukraine is winning, but what is your take on this? Do you feel the war is going your way to the extent you are now holding Russian forces at bay?
Well, basically what's changing is that technology is finally dictating the terms on the battlefield. And as far as technology is concerned, Ukraine is leading. So there is a certain turning point, and there's a lot of pressure in Russia domestically because they're losing their oil refineries. You know, people are becoming grumpy with the whole thing or starting to notice that there is actually a war going on. So in that sense, yes, Ukraine is doing well. In the sense of the actual battlefield, Russia is still throwing cannon fodder at us. So there is small and steady progress for them, but they are running out of people. So I think this summer and the beginning of autumn is actually crucial. I mean, it's the crossroads. There are 2 potential scenarios. One, there's a serious negotiation and a ceasefire or peace. The second one is Putin decides to double down on his efforts, announces general mobilization, and it's an all-out war where one side must lose at some point.
Tell me then, Igor, how did Ukraine manage to bring about these advantages when it came to tech warfare?
Well, I don't think we have enough time now to explain everything, but I would say this. First of all, when you open the battlefield to the innovators and can remove the bureaucracy and let them do their thing, it works well. Then you kind of scale the technology and you try and not be constrained by what you think is impossible and what you think is not doable or conventional. That way we move, for example, a drone warfare from, the classic drones where you have an operator, a radio link and everything, to optical fiber and in most cases now fully autonomous drones that cannot be easily detected, cannot be easily intercepted, and thus, are breaking through the Russian air defense.
And when it came to the particular tech advantages that Ukraine has in know-how and the way that some of your drones, especially I think the anti-drone drones, give you this advantage in the air, how is it possible to keep that to yourself? Because, I know little about these matters, believe me, but I would have imagined that if you can capture a robot, if you can capture a highly, highly advanced drone, you can reverse engineer it and see what these secrets are.
Well, it's not as simple as that. I know it sounds logical, but it's not as simple as that, first and foremost. But secondly, it's a continuous process. Darwin said, and actually one of our deputy prime ministers actually just said it in Gdansk during his speech. It's not the survival of the fittest, it's the survival of the most adaptive. So instead of firmly standing on our own 2 feet, we're learning to ride the bike.
Okay, well, it's working for you. And meanwhile, as we said, Donald Trump is there congratulating Ukraine. He's impressed, apparently. He says it's going very well. Do you realistically hope that President Trump, because this might be an important development, turns and puts real pressure on Vladimir Putin? I think there's speculation that there could be more energy sanctions out of America.
It's a possibility, but the only kind of slight reservation I have here is the short attention span that Donald Trump has. I mean, let me remind you, he hasn't spoken to Putin directly since, this turning point and since the last recent events. So usually from what we've seen in the past, he turns pro-Ukrainian for a couple of weeks, then Putin calls, and it's back to square one. So remains to be seen. But if he does that, that will be a definite big step towards peace.
Well, fingers crossed, of course, for that. And meanwhile, when it comes to the vital matter of air defences, and you have your counter-drone drones, of course, but missiles are still important. The Patriot missile, such an advanced, important weapon. And I read that there's a hope in Ukraine that you might get licences to develop Patriots there in Ukraine. Just explain to me the significance of that.
Well, it will be incredibly significant, not only for Ukraine, but for Europe in general, because the war in Iran has actually depleted all the stocks of anti-ballistic interceptors. And, the current production rate in the US alone is not enough to replenish those stockpiles and to combat the existing threat from ballistic missiles. So in layman's terms, the bad guys have more missiles than we have interceptors. So one has to do something about it. One option is to license out production to Ukraine or Europe, or both, because both parties are actually incredibly motivated to produce as quickly and as efficiently as possible. The second option that we're actually working on right now as well is develop our own anti-ballistic interceptor. I know it sounds difficult, but I mean, we've surprised the world before. And the third option that we are also working on is seeing, what else can be done about ballistic missiles. So, stay tuned, as they say.
All right. And just lastly, could you just talk to us a little bit about Ukraine's capacity to strike targets deeper inside Russia, whether they're infrastructure targets or militarily significant targets? What sort of role do you think that is going to play in the war as it continues? Are we talking about psychological effects on Russia? Are we talking about a material difference to the capacity of Russia to wage its war?
Well, you have to remember that Russia is a dictatorship. So in terms of, public opinion, there are two versions of it. One is the official one. The second one is the real one, and that nobody knows. So at the moment, from what we're seeing behind the scenes, most of the Russian people actually support Putin's efforts, his imperialistic ambition to kind of restore the former glory of the Soviet Union and so on and so forth, capture Ukraine. So in order to combat that, we need to put pressure on his population. But unlike Russia, we're not resorting to terrorist tactics, not bombing high-rise buildings or blowing up planes. Instead, what we're doing, we're destroying his economy, and we're making life difficult for the ordinary pro-Putin Ivan somewhere in Moscow or in Siberia. One way to do it would be to leave him without fuel, so they can't drive their cars. And because, they're proud of their oil industry and they think that they're the world leader, they'll get them to notice that, something's actually happening, on their doorstep. So that increases pressure on Putin because Russia doesn't like losers. So it's our job to make him a loser.
Right, Igor Novikov, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you. Igor is a former advisor to Vladimir Zelesnky. And now, Bartosz Wielinski joins us. He's a deputy editor-in-chief at the Polish newspaper Gazeta Wyborcza. Hello to you, Bartosz.
Hello. Good evening.
It's good to have you here. So we have generally thought of Poland as being a very close friend and ally to Ukraine. You received, haven't you, over a period, nearly 1 million Ukrainians into the country, and now you're in this rather bitter dispute, which has involved Poland taking back a high honour, the Order of the White Eagle that was awarded to President Zelensky. Can you just help us understand all of this? It seems to have something to do with a dispute about the naming of a military unit.
Well, there's a dispute about, very complicated Polish-Ukrainian history, and the tragic one, indeed tragic one. In 40s and 43, when Poland was occupied by the Germans, part of the Ukraine, which belonged before the Second World War to Poland, was also occupied by the Germans, and Ukrainians' military underground units started ethnical cleansing of Poles who lived there. So, well, they committed atrocities, killing Poles, killed approximately, 40,000 of people, civilians. There were clashes also with Polish units who tried to defend the Patriots. There were the acts of revenge, typical bloody, tragical history, which has never been, properly analyzed, relieved. There was no reconciliation like we had a reconciliation with Germans. And when the war started, or others say, so when the communism was over, when the Berlin Mauer and the Iron Curtain fell down, we decided just to, live with this and not to, relive this tragical events. We decided to move forward, to look in the future. And it's very interesting that when Russia invaded Ukraine for the first time in 2014, when they annexed Crimea and started, annexing eastern parts of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, some people started to talk very loud on remembering those tragical events from 40s, from the Second World War. And among certain, far-right groups in Poland, which unfortunately we have, it started to be a dominant line in their relations towards Ukraine that we must remember the victims of Volyn massacre. Of course, we remember them, but they were not happy how strong this remembrance were. And after the change in the presidency in Poland, the desire to make relations with Ukraine more strict, this Trumpian approach towards Ukraine, that they should say thank you, becomes very visible and very vocal. And our new president started to be some kind, aggressive, demanding towards Ukraine, asking them that they should be grateful. They should say thank you. And of course, they should be more sensitive and open towards Polish desires to commemorate Polish victims of Second World War killed by Ukrainian nationalists.
Okay.
And the pretext for this action was that Vladimir Zelensky named one of units of Ukrainian special forces after the heroes of UPA. UPA was this organization, underground military organization, which was, conducting ethnical cleansing in Volhynia in the 40s, and after that they were fighting with Soviets, advancing Soviets from the east in 45, 44, and then fighting with Soviet authorities when entire Ukraine was conquered by the Soviet Union. So he started to instrumentalize this fact, and our president decided that when those events triggered him to start, a serious diplomatic clash with Ukraine. And at the end, the order was given by previous president to Volodymyr Zelensky, the highest Polish civilian decoration, the Order of White Eagle, was revoked, which was absurd. And but you see how complicated it is. It's very difficult to explain it to foreigners. Our Polish-Ukrainian clashes, but at the end we land in a serious diplomatic crisis in the eve of this Ukrainian recovery conference in Gdańsk, which is devastating. All
right, Bartosz, thank you for that primer into the source of this tension. This unit, this military unit, the UPA, is seen on the Ukrainian side, remembered as a ferocious nationalistic unit which fought the Soviets, and on the Polish side, the massacre of Poles, the group is also blamed for, and it's developed into the row we see now. There's something deeper there as well here, isn't there? As you suggested there, elections are coming, and there's this certain feeling, strong feeling among Poles that you call it Trumpian, but there's also a resentment of the benefits that are available to Ukrainians now in Poland.
Well, those benefits has already been cut. It is untrue that Ukrainians are being granted benefits. They are hardworking people who use every opportunity they have in Poland just to work, just to be part of our society, just to do something good for this country that is hosting them and for their country from which they have fled. The Ukrainians produce 3.7% of Polish GDP. So they produce as much as Polish agriculture, which is famous in Europe. As I said, they work hard. They integrate themselves with the Polish society. They speak Polish. They try to be good neighbors. And
Yes.
in my part of Warsaw where I live, there are plenty of Ukrainians. You could listen Ukrainian. You could hear the Ukrainian language on the streets.
And there's a very close relationship between Poles and Ukrainians. It has been over many years. I'll have to leave it there though now for the moment though. But Bartosz Wielinski, thank you so much for telling us about that background.